Anyway, we're in Speaker Kirk Cox's conference room. This is the biggest conference table I've seen since the Geneva Convention and the Paris Accords. This thing is, Jeremy, have you ever seen a bigger conference table than this?
It's a boat.
It's kind of imposing. They could have had this on the Ark, right?
No question.
It is a big conference table. We're good to be here. The Speaker Kirk Cox, is with us, and we appreciate your being here. We're going to have a very good discussion. Lots to talk about, but of course, Speaker Cox, we have to start about basketball, right? We always start with that. And so we have our last conference game, St. Matthew's, my school, on Saturday. We win that. We're going to be 15-1. So we're going to be the second seed. I get a first-round bye. And so I'm likely to play, if you look at the brackets, we're going to play the top seed, the number one, who beat us in the opening game 16 games ago. I know you had a similar situation. And it's likely going to come down to that if we take care of business with the other teams. And, of course, today, 3 o'clock, getting together, breaking down game film. But they can't prepare for us because we run your jump press defense, which is it's chaos, right? Absolute chaos. Plus, our kids really learn how to play defense through that, so we're tough. But then, Kirk, I run a pure, unadulterated Paul Westhead offense. We just run the ball, 95 FGAs a game, 30 offensive rebounds is our goal. And we want to take a shot within 14 seconds of every possession, 15 max. If we do that, we're going to take 100 shots. And you can't beat us. It's just too many shots. And I got some shooters, so it's going to be fun. We can prepare for them, traditional half-court offense, stack this, that, motion in, 5 out. You've seen it all. You can't prepare for us.
Yeah, it's all, I love what you're doing. It's all if you can control the tempo. If your kids can make them run, and if your kids, as you say, if you're setting up, you're in trouble, but you're not going to be setting up.
Right.
And so if you can run your primary and secondary break and rattle them, which you'll do.
Right.
And as I've always said, John, and I know you've done this, in the third quarter when they're huffing and puffing, you look over there and tell your kids they can't hang with us, even if it's close, right. And that's the key.
That's it. And we do a 90-second rotation.
Yep.
So every 90 seconds. It's intimidating because you get to the end of the third quarter, and I've still got every 90 seconds 5 new players coming in, and we're pressing them the whole game. They're dogged. And so our thing is, if we can get to the fourth quarter down by 8 or under, we know we're going to win. That's kind of a mindset. So having said that, boy, we got a lot to talk about. Okay, Medicaid expansion. Let's start with that. And we got both sides of the aisle and both chambers here with us. So I know you're opposed to it, and I love you to death, but it's going to happen, right? Terry Kilgore broke the dam. You know he's got some other people with him. And now it's a matter of just negotiating the best deal with the governor, Mr. Speaker. I don't see how you're going to stop it.
Well, I respect Delegate Kilgore, but I've been very clear that on Medicaid expansion, we've had some good talks with the governor. There are 6 key Republican principles that we have to have. I'll give you 2 or 3. One, obviously, is the work requirement, which we talked about. And we've worked with the governor to make sure there's an education training component, there's some credentialing, et cetera, but that's essential. But there are things like kill switch. Right now, the expansion piece is a 90-10 match, 90 federal, 10 state. We've never had confidence they'll keep that. And so we're going to insist on that. If it drops below 90, then Medicaid expansion goes away. And obviously, the Democrats have told us forever that will never happen, so they shouldn't worry about that. Number 3, and I think this is going to be the one that, and whether you're at Metro or whatever issue you're talking about, everybody always talks about, we'll do the reforms, and the reforms never happen. So the key is the timing. The governor very much wants Medicaid expansion to immediately be implemented. We want the waivers to be implemented at the same time. Because if we're going to do all these great waivers that are health savings accounts and co-pays, if you go to the emergency room, we just don't trust that's going to happen unless there's that. Now, here's the good news. I think the Trump administration, very much different than the Obama administration, wants to see those kind of reforms. But that's key. And, John, without those, it would be hard for me to make any kind of agreement with the governor.
So let's get the Senator McPike, Senator, on your side. Jeremy McPike, you've got 19 votes right now. You're going to get Edmund Hanger, that's 20. You got Justin Fairfax. Can your chamber live with some of the provisions that the speaker's laid out? Your caucus.
If it's about the outcomes. It really is. I think we have some, if we talk about the objectives of increasing access, we understand the folks that we're trying to reach with the population and expanding Medicaid. If we're talking about the verbiage and some of the work requirements, is if they're able, we know there's some people in that population that have some difficulty meeting some of those requirements. As long as there's protections for those who truly can't do that, I think there's, we're open for those discussions.
Now, what about the speaker's provision here that if it goes under 90%, it goes away? That is exactly the same thing that the Godfather, your leader, Dick Saslow, said in the last debate. He said he had no problem going with that. Is that still something you guys are all right with?
Look, we always have to reevaluate. If federal government changes policy, you have to reevaluate. We do that every year. There's tweaks and changes. You have to reassess.
Yeah, but Saslow said unequivocally in 13, 14, and 15 that he had no problem, Dick Saslow, with if it goes under 90%, he'd be fine with it just being eliminated. And he said he would sign something for that. So I'm just holding you guys accountable to what your
I don't see how that's unreasonable. I mean, like I said, if federal government policy changes, you have to reevaluate. And you need some safety guards and Virginia's fiscal prudence to make sure that's in place. That doesn't go against our values. We always have to reevaluate and reassess. But I mean, just to come back to a point, how many years have we been sort of predicting the rollback and it hasn't happened? At some point, there's some prudence to move beyond this. We know that not expanding is going to create a $125 million hole in the governor's proposed budget. There are some good outcomes that we can do by expanding Medicaid. And, we need to be open to have this discussion. If there's some work requirements, there's some other things. And to be at the table, I'm certainly hesitant on things that, some of the bills proposed out of the Senate, which are 50-50 match. Why not draw the 90-10 or 94-10 or 94-6 right now? In the future, it'd be 90-10. We need to draw some of those dollars. We have a lot of people with a lot of needs all across Virginia. It's not just a south side, southwest. I've got 9,200 people in my district that could benefit potentially. Depends on who signs up. Obviously, that changes the numbers, but right. 9,200 people in my district that are eligible, and you get a lot of folks that are struggle to have access, and it's healthcare is a complicated subject. We all know it. We see COPN reform discussions. We see right. access increasing provider right. access. You hear hospitals say certain things. There's sort of a triangle of complexity that gets involved here.
Well,
we got to do something.
I like the waivers and your timing issue and the go under 90%. You get rid of it because that's really the argument against it. Is what happens if it goes under 90%? You can't fund it. Let's get to your relationship with the new governor, Mr. Speaker. You got to work with him on a lot of things. Just define that for us.
Much better. I did not have a good relationship with Governor McAuliffe just from day one. I've always said I think Governor Northam's personality probably fits my personality better. Having been a state senator, I think he's attuned with the legislative process. I think he understands that you can't always be the show horse. Some of the negotiations have to be private, and you have to have a trust factor. You have to think from both sides that whatever the deal that you make, the other side is going to follow through with it, et cetera. And so one of the things that was very important to us was regulatory reform, and we've just struggled to get it. The last few years, we put all kinds of bills in, and when I sat down with the governor and said that's a priority of the Republican caucus, I thought we have a very good bill that's coming over that basically gives it a good start. DPOR and Department of Criminal Justice Services, and I think especially DPOR, agencies that have tons of regulations, licensing, especially for different professions, and we came to an agreement on cutting basically regulations by 25% and establishing some baselines in the other agencies. So eventually the hope would be that we make some progress there. What has happened over the years is and even some of the various associations have put various requirements in to protect them. And the accumulation of that over the last 10 or 15 years has really created a lot of barriers. So, and we always say we're going to look at it. Department of Planning and Budget always says they're going to look at it, and there's not a serious effort. And so that was a great compromise. The other one quickly is the grand larceny threshold. We raised it from 200 to 500. And that is something the Democrats wanted very badly. I'm sympathetic with that. I mean, people should have a second chance. Having said that, my passion was much more restitution for victims. And the governor agreed that we could shore that up. Delegate Rob Bell had 2 bills in on that, but very quickly one was, there's even about $8 million out there of where the restitution's been paid. They haven't gotten into the victim, and no one's really trying very hard to do that. And there's probably another $260 million out there that's never been collected. And so strengthening that process. So both sides got, I think, a key tenet. So that's good. So obviously if we can work on things like that, that's a good thing.
So tell us about some of your other accomplishments. We talked about regulatory reform, grand larceny to a certain extent. Anything else you see going down in the regulatory reform area?
Well, I think that's the big one in the regulatory reform area, and that's, as I've said, that's the biggest thing I've seen in years. Here's a big one, though, that we've really pushed in the House, and that is in K-12, which, of course, I did for 30 years teaching. Our philosophy the last few years is let's try to return as much of the lottery money unencumbered to localities. And I'm hoping this year, and we'll see when the budget comes out, that we're going to jump that up even more. And there's a debate here. Do you do specific, more at-risk programs from the state level? You do more specific, what we consider the fixes at the state level? Or do you basically send that money back, trust the localities and local school systems, say, this program works for us? I'll give you a quick example. When I was at Manchester High School in Chesterfield, we had a great intervention program with kids in middle school. We had a 9th grade program. We knew which kids were at risk in middle school. And so that was a program unique to us. It worked. The problem is if you had to follow the state program exactly, it was hard, obviously, to make that work. And so if Manchester is doing something that works for them, then another school in my district, Monica, might do something differently, and they can obviously use that money sort of the way they want to use that money. So that's a key tenet. So that one I think is huge. So that's another big one for us.
Let's get Jeremy involved here. Senator Jeremy McPike also with us, Democrat from Prince William County, big fan of Corey Stort's. I know you are deep down.
Oh, no question.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, he's just tough not to love. Senator,
wow.
Dominion Power Compromise. Okay, so $132 million rebate back just comes in August, just in time for high air conditioning bills. Average rebate is going to be about $50, $60 that month. $200 million coming from over the deal they made to give a rebate back. Another $132 million they're going to give back as a result of the Trump tax cut. That's money in people's pockets. Are you guys in favor of it? Are you in favor?
I am not.
Why?
I still had concerns on some of the transparency of the process. I have a little problem with us as a legislature regulating, well, basically setting rates. We have a state corporation commission that does the review process for a reason, and the reason they set it up over 100 years ago is to take the political aspect out of it and to make sure that the consumers are getting the best bang for the buck. I think there are some good things in it in terms of modernizing the grid, increasing solar and wind portfolio. I think those are great. Those are laudable goals. I still have concerns on the transparency side of this thing. And we start to dabble in very complex things like utilities. We get shorted on the end of the deal. And so there are still several $100 million that are in question each and every year as it rolls year over year. And as a consumer, I'd be concerned of that. And, I got to look out for my constituents.
Mr. Speaker, it just seems to me as a layman from the outside to be a pretty good compromise. I mean, the deal was made. It happened to be to their advantage. Now you got the deal over the deal. I have a lot of confidence in Frank Wagner, who was part of the negotiating team for this. And average Virginia is going to get about a $50 or $60 rebate in August, and then another one in September, just in the middle of air conditioning season. Why is this bad?
Well, I voted for the Dominion, legislation. I do think it's improved dramatically. And, Jeremy certainly voiced some of the concerns you heard on the floor. But having said that, as I recall, I think the bill started off with something like $135 million returned to taxpayers. I got up to $200 million. the tax provisions, basically, because Dominion will get somewhat of a windfall, will be passed through earlier the way the bill works. As he has said, I think if you add up, not only the hardening of the grid, but some of the obviously provisions on alternative energy, you could get to about $1 billion in what you would consider benefits. There's sort of some key undergrounding provisions that would help Northern Virginia and Haymarket, and some broadband provisions actually to maybe help with broadband. So I do think it's a good compromise. I think some of the things that were put back in for SEC regulation, the timing of that, et cetera. One of the big things, and you hear one of the complaints is there sort of a double dipping type of thing, and I think Delegate Kilgore has assured people that he doesn't think that's in there. If it is, it's fairly small, but that will be addressed in committee. So that's probably the biggest contention over in the House is that in there or not? And, to Jeremy's point, it's complex legislation, so that's difficult. But I do think we need to be proactive. It's a different day, and I do think it's fair legislation. It's much improved from where it started. And so I think it benefits the consumer much more, but it also allows them to, I think, do some important things.
We're live at the General Assembly today, the Virginia General Assembly. We're with Speaker of the House of Delegates, Republican from Colonial Heights, Kirk Cox. We're also with State Senator, Democrat, Jeremy McPike from the Prince William area. And also with us today is Michael Pope, reporter from Virginia Public Radio. Michael?
Was interested in asking you about the overbilling. So there was a period of years that the ratepayers were overbilled, and some of that is going to go back to them. You brought it up to $200 million, but we don't really know how much was actually overbilled, right? I mean, there was one of the things that this deal that's moving forward now doesn't do is figure out exactly how much was overbilled. I've seen some estimates that it was as much as $1 billion. Why not sort of take the effort to figure out how much was overbilled and then sort of return that to the ratepayers?
Well, I think there are varying figures, you're right. But if you look at some of the other pieces, I do think, for example, the way that look-back provision is now going to work, I think it goes back to 2017, so that's an improvement. But, it's like any other compromise. I mean, I think we moved substantially as far as trying to return some of that consumer money. With any compromise at some point, there are things that you consider doable and not. So I would say as an overall package, it's pretty strong.
So it sounds, Senator McPike, that you're okay with the numbers as it stands with Dominion, but your concern is you just want to be sure and you want more transparency and you want to see everything, then you could verify whether the level of rebates they're giving are fair or not. Is that what I've heard?
That's a part of it. I mean, the problem is when the General Assembly starts to dabble in this, and you saw it with the rate freeze,
right?
We create a lot of issues.
Right.
This is a very complex section of the code,
right,
and we have a lot of unintended consequences when we start to dabble. And that's what we're doing. If you look at the sunset provisions, that the new reinvestment phases out in 2028. The way that utilities make their money is on the invested assets,
right,
and the hard assets. That's where they're guaranteed a return on investment. And so essentially, we are providing a cash capital upfront loan from all of our consumers to a private stockholder, a publicly traded company that in 10 years will own those assets and have a guaranteed return on investment from essentially a free cash capital loan from everybody who's listening. So sounds like a great deal. If I've got a company and you've got a company, I would love a $400 million cash capital loan. I don't know about you, and in 10 years I'm guaranteed return on investment on all those. Sounds pretty sweet to me.
Mr. Speaker, we've only got a couple minutes. Lessons learned as Speaker of the House in the first 2 months.
Well, it's an interesting job. You can sort of anticipate what's going to happen till you get there. One of the things that is the biggest challenge when you're standing up there's so much going on. And so with all the various motions people can give. And so one of the things I've always tried to do is really prepare. It's like coaching. But that has been, I don't think you can anticipate how much you need to prepare. And you over-prepare. So you think everyone's going to make every motion known to man. So you have all these pieces of paper up there anticipating, these 400 things that can happen, and probably 3 of them happen. So, so that's obviously one thing. And I would say Actually, I think it's gone very well. You know, everyone had such dire consequences coming into this, or predictions coming into the session, that we were never going to be able to get anything done, that it was all going to blow up. And I think ultimately most people that serve, both in the Senate and the House, you know, have a heart for their constituents. You know, they ran for the right reasons. And I think when you get down here, contrary to popular belief, and I do think we're fundamentally different than Washington, that we get a lot of things done. You know, not everyone's pleased with everything, and we've done that. I mean, if you look at crossover, you know, there are a lot of accomplishments. We've talked about some of them. There are actually a lot more than that. And so I've been very pleased. I think it's been a good first half. We've got some tough issues. Medicaid is one you've talked about. We got a little ways to go on that, but, you know, I've been very pleased with how it's gone.
You having fun?
I am. I've really enjoyed it. It's quite an honor. It's a little bit daunting, but I've really enjoyed it. Somebody taught me that I'm not good at that. I tend to, you know, basically a very intense person. So, you know, people will tell yourself when you win the championship, take a second, look around, and enjoy it. I'm not like that. When I won, it was like, okay, what's the next game? That's just my nature. So
I'm going to take your advice on that tournament final win when they give us that trophy, and I'm going to savor the moment and enjoy it. I'm going to say, you know what? Kirk Cox told me, take this in and enjoy it. Hey, we're out of time for this segment. I want to thank the Speaker of the House, Kirk Cox, for not only being here, but letting us use his Umungo conference room. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, as always. And Jeremy McPike, always a pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Jeremy,
great to be here.
Thanks, John.
So much. Good to have you guys back.